The garage was alive with laughter and the soft clatter of dice rolling on the old wooden table. Taron leaned back in his chair, holding a slice of pizza in one hand and pointing at the game board with the other. "Milo, if you mess up this roll, we're doomed. Don't choke, man," Jace snorted, popping open another soda. "He's going to choke. Guaranteed." Milo shot them both an annoyed glare, took a deep breath and shook the dice dramatically before rolling. The dice skittered across the table and the group erupted into cheers as the roll secured their victory. "Finally, boys' night champion right here," Milo declared, raising his arms triumphantly. Before anyone could throw more banter, the garage lights flickered and a low, vibrating hum filled the air. The sound was faint at first, but it quickly grew louder, almost like a deep resonance shaking the ground beneath them. Taron frowned and stood up, the pizza forgotten. "What the hell was that?" he muttered, glancing at his friends. Jace's eyes widened as he pointed toward the cracked garage door. Guys, you might want to look outside." The trio rushed out into the driveway, the chilly night air hitting them as they squinted at the sky. Above, a massive shadow moved, blotting out the stars. As it descended, the faint glow of streetlights illuminated the unmistakable shape of a spacecraft. Its surface shimmered with an almost liquid metallic texture, and glowing veins of light pulsed along its sides. "No way," Milo whispered, taking a step back. Taron could feel his heart pounding in his chest as the ship came to a stop, hovering silently above the cul-de-sac. A beam of light shot down from the ship, hitting the ground a few feet away from them. The air around it shimmered as if reality itself was bending. Slowly, a figure emerged from the light. Towering over them at nearly 10 feet tall, she was unlike anything Taron had ever seen. Her skin was a soft, luminous cyan, with faint patterns glowing faintly across her arms and legs. Long, silver hair flowed down her back, and her eyes were an iridescent swirl of colors that seemed to shift with every glance. She wore armor-like clothing that was both sleek and regal, with intricate designs that glowed faintly in the dim light. The woman scanned the group, her gaze sharp and assessing. When she spoke, her voice was deep yet melodic, with a tone that commanded attention. "Identify yourselves," she said, her words carrying a strange, almost mechanical echo as if they were being translated in real time. Taron stepped forward hesitantly, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. We're just some guys hanging out. Who are you and why are you in my driveway?" The alien's gaze locked onto him, and for a moment, Taron felt as though she could see straight through him. "My name is Kaelynn," she said, her tone clipped. "I am a sentinel of Vayona, tasked with locating and neutralizing a bioorganism that has escaped containment. It is currently hiding on this planet. Your assistance will be required." Jace let out a nervous laugh. "Wait, hold up. Assistance? We're not exactly alien hunters here. Maybe try NASA or something." Kaelynn ignored him, her focus solely on Taron. "This is not a request," she said firmly. "The bioorganism poses a significant threat to all life forms on this planet. You will cooperate." Taron felt a mixture of fear and frustration bubbling inside him. He didn't appreciate being ordered around, especially by someone who had just crashed into his night uninvited. "Look, Kaelynn," he said, taking a cautious step forward. "We don't know anything about aliens or bioorganisms or whatever. We're just normal people, but maybe if you explain what's going on, we can help." Kaelynn tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. Finally, she nodded. "Very well. The bioorganism in question is a shapeshifter capable of mimicking Earth life forms. It is highly intelligent and extremely dangerous. If it is not contained, it will adapt and become unstoppable." She glanced around the quiet neighborhood. "It is likely hiding in this area. My ship's sensors detected its presence nearby." Milo raised his hand nervously as if he were in a classroom. "So, why do you need us? Don't you have fancy alien tech to deal with this?" Kaelynn's eyes narrowed slightly and she crossed her arms. My equipment is designed for advanced civilizations. Your planet's chaotic and primitive nature interferes with my scans. I require local knowledge to locate the organism." Taron exchanged a glance with his friends. This was insane. Just a few minutes ago, they were arguing over board games, and now they were being recruited by a giant alien woman to hunt down a shape-shifting monster. "All right," he said finally, his voice steady despite the surreal situation. "We'll help, but on one condition." Kaelynn raised an eyebrow, clearly unamused. "You're not in a position to make demands." Taron held up a hand. "Just hear me out. If we're doing this, you have to stop treating us like we're idiots. We're not soldiers, but we can figure things out if you give us a chance." For the first time, a flicker of something softened in Kaelynn's expression. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. "Very well," she said. "I will attempt to accommodate your limitations." The faintest hint of amusement colored her voice, but Taron chose to let it slide. As Kaelynn began setting up some kind of portable scanning device, Taron leaned over to Jace and Milo. "This is officially the weirdest boys' night ever," he whispered. Milo nodded emphatically. "We're either gonna be heroes or dead." Jace smirked. "Let's aim for the first one, yeah." The three of them stood together, watching as Kaelynn's alien tech hummed to life, casting strange lights across the garage. Taron couldn't help but wonder what exactly they had gotten themselves into, and if they would live to see the end of it. The garage was bathed in an eerie blue glow as Kaelynn's scanning device came to life. The cylindrical apparatus floated a few feet off the ground, emitting a rhythmic hum. It projected a holographic display into the air, filled with alien symbols and pulsating dots. Taron tried not to look too awestruck, but it was hard not to feel like he had stepped straight into a sci-fi movie. "What exactly is that thing doing?" he asked, glancing at Kaelynn. "It is attuning to the bioorganism's unique energy signature," she replied, her iridescent eyes never leaving the display. "Once calibrated, it will alert us to its approximate location." Jace leaned closer to Taron, whispering out of the corner of his mouth. "Do you think she's just making all this up? What if this is some weird alien prank?" "She doesn't exactly seem like the prank type," Taron muttered back. "And unless you've got a better explanation for the giant spaceship, I think we're stuck with her." Kaelynn's head snapped toward them, her expression unreadable. "I can hear you," she said flatly. Jace froze mid-whisper, his face flushing. Milo tried and failed to stifle a laugh, earning a sharp glare from both Taron and Kaelynn. Before anyone could say more, the scanning device let out a sharp, high-pitched beep. Kaelynn straightened, her posture tense. "It has found something," she announced. The holographic display shifted, zooming in on a nearby map of the neighborhood. A glowing red dot blinked a few blocks away. "The bioorganism is moving. We must act quickly." "Wait, hold on," Taron said, raising his hands. "You're telling me we're just going to chase after this thing with what? A flashlight and a baseball bat? We're not exactly armed for this." Kaelynn tilted her head as if confused by his hesitation. "Your survival is not guaranteed," she said bluntly. "But if you require tools, I suggest you retrieve them now." "Great," Milo muttered. Nothing like a little life-or-death motivation to really spice up the evening. Despite his sarcasm, he grabbed a sturdy crowbar from the corner of the garage. Taron found an old metal pipe and Jace settled on a golf club. It wasn't much, but it made them feel slightly less helpless. As they prepared to leave, Kaelynn extended her hand, and a sleek, silver weapon materialized in her grasp. It looked like a cross between a sword and a staff, with glowing edges that hummed softly. "I will handle the creature," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Your task is to alert me if you see anything unusual. Stay close and stay silent." "Yeah, because we're great at being quiet," Jace muttered under his breath. The group set off down the street, the night eerily still around them. The houses were dark, their occupants long since asleep, oblivious to the alien drama unfolding just outside. Taron felt a shiver run down his spine as they approached the location marked by the scanner. A vacant construction site loomed ahead, its skeletal framework casting long shadows under the pale moonlight. Kaelynn stopped abruptly, holding up a hand. "It is here," she said quietly. Her eyes scanned the area, their swirling colors shifting rapidly. "The organism is aware of our presence. Be vigilant." The group spread out cautiously, their makeshift weapons at the ready. Taron's heart was pounding so loudly he was sure the others could hear it. He glanced at Kaelynn, who moved with an effortless grace, her weapon glowing faintly in the dark. Despite her intimidating presence, there was something oddly reassuring about her confidence. A sudden noise shattered the silence, a metallic clatter coming from one of the unfinished buildings. Kaelynn motioned for them to follow as she advanced toward the sound. Taron gripped his pipe tightly, his palms slick with sweat. As they entered the structure, the air seemed to grow colder and an unsettling feeling settled over him. Milo nudged Taron and pointed toward the far corner. "Did you see that?" he whispered. Taron squinted, but all he could make out was a faint movement in the shadows. Kaelynn stepped forward, her weapon raised. "Come out," she commanded, her voice ringing with authority. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sickeningly fluid motion, something emerged from the darkness. The creature was unlike anything Taron had imagined. Its form was constantly shifting, flickering between shapes as if it couldn't decide on a single one. At times, it appeared humanoid, with elongated limbs and glowing eyes. At others, it resembled a grotesque, multi-legged predator. Its surface shimmered with an oily sheen and its movements were unnervingly smooth, almost hypnotic. "That's the thing we're supposed to stop," Jace whispered, his voice shaking. "Are we sure it's not going to stop us first?" Kaelynn didn't reply. She lunged forward, her weapon slicing through the air with a sharp hum. The creature reacted instantly, its form rippling as it dodged the attack. It let out a guttural, otherworldly screech that made Taron's stomach churn. The fight that followed was a blur of movement and sound. Kaelynn moved with astonishing speed, her weapon glowing brighter with each strike. The creature countered with equal ferocity, its limbs stretching and reshaping to evade her blows. Taron and his friends stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of the way. Suddenly, the creature turned its attention to them. Its glowing eyes locked onto Taron and it lunged toward him with terrifying speed. Time seemed to slow as Taron raised his pipe, his mind racing. Before the creature could reach him, Kaelynn appeared between them, her weapon slamming into its side with a burst of light. The creature recoiled, letting out another ear-piercing screech. "Stay back," Kaelynn barked, her voice sharp. Taron stumbled backward, his heart racing. He glanced at Milo and Jace, who looked just as shaken as he felt. This was way beyond anything they were prepared for. The creature let out a final, bone-chilling shriek before retreating into the shadows. Kaelynn didn't pursue it. Instead, she lowered her weapon and turned to the group. "It has fled," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "But it will not go far. We must track it before it can adapt further." Taron nodded numbly, his mind still reeling from what had just happened. "Right," he said, his voice shaky. Let's do that." As they left the construction site, Taron couldn't help but glance at Kaelynn. She was clearly in control of the situation, but there was a flicker of something in her expression. Worry, maybe, or doubt. Whatever it was, it made him realize just how high the stakes really were. This wasn't just an adventure, it was survival. The group moved through the quiet streets, the tension hanging thick in the air. Taron's legs felt like lead, each step accompanied by the pounding of his heart. He kept stealing glances at Kaelynn, who was leading them with a determination that seemed almost unshakable. Yet, beneath her composed exterior, he could sense an undercurrent of urgency. The scanner hovered beside her, its blue light flickering erratically as it recalibrated. "What's the plan if this thing comes back?" Milo asked, his voice low but trembling. Kaelynn didn't look back. "The bioorganism will adapt to the energy signature of my weapon if it is exposed for too long. That is why we must strike decisively." "Adapt? Great," Jace muttered, dragging his golf club along the pavement. So this thing's not only terrifying, it's smart too. Kaelynn paused, her eyes narrowing at the display. Smart is not the correct term. It is reactive, driven by survival instincts rather than calculated reasoning, but that makes it no less dangerous. Taron let the information sink in. The creature wasn't just some mindless beast, it was evolving, becoming harder to predict with every encounter. And what happens if we don't stop it? He asked. Kaelynn hesitated just for a moment. It will grow, she said quietly. Its biomass will expand, consuming everything in its path. If it reaches a critical mass, it could destabilize this entire region. A chill ran down Taron's spine. So no pressure, he muttered. The scanner let out a series of sharp beeps, drawing everyone's attention. Kaelynn's gaze locked onto the holographic map, where the red dot had reappeared. It was moving quickly, heading toward an area Taron recognized immediately, the park at the edge of the neighborhood. It is heading to an open space, Kaelynn said, her voice tight, likely preparing for its next phase of growth. Wait, the park, Milo said, his face paling. That's close to where the old festival grounds are. There could still be people hanging out there. Taron's stomach sank. The idea of anyone getting caught up in this nightmare was unbearable. We need to move, he said, his voice firm. Now. Kaelynn nodded and the group broke into a run, the urgency driving them forward. The streets blurred as they made their way toward the park, the cool night air doing little to calm their nerves. By the time they reached the edge of the park, Taron was out of breath, his chest heaving. The park was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of nightlife absent. In the distance, the faint glow of the festival grounds' abandoned lights cast long, flickering shadows. The scanner's beeping grew more insistent, guiding them toward a dense grove of trees near the center of the park. Kaelynn held up a hand, signaling them to stop. "It is here," she whispered. Taron strained his eyes, searching the shadows for any sign of movement. The grove was dark, the canopy of leaves blocking out the moonlight. Every instinct screamed at him to turn and run, but he forced himself to stay rooted. A low, guttural noise emerged from the darkness, sending a shiver through the group. The creature stepped into the dim light, its form even more grotesque than before. It had grown larger, its limbs elongated and shifting erratically. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its body pulsed with a sickening rhythm, as if it were alive in ways it shouldn't be. Kaelynn stepped forward, her weapon raised. "You will not progress further," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The creature let out a deafening screech, its body contorting as it prepared to strike. Kaelynn lunged, her movements a blur as she engaged the creature. Sparks flew as her weapon clashed against its shifting form, each strike accompanied by flashes of light that illuminated the grove. Taron, Jace, and Milo stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Kaelynn's precision and speed were breathtaking, but the creature was relentless, adapting to her attacks with terrifying speed. "We can't just stand here," Taron shouted, his voice breaking through the paralysis gripping his friends. "What are we supposed to do?" Jace yelled back, his grip tightening on the golf club. "Anything, distract it." Taron didn't wait for a response. He picked up a rock and hurled it at the creature. The impact barely fazed it, but it was enough to draw its attention for a split second. Kaelynn took advantage of the opening, landing a powerful strike that sent the creature stumbling back. Jace and Milo followed Taron's lead, throwing whatever they could find, rocks, sticks, even an old soda can Milo had in his pocket. It wasn't much, but it gave Kaelynn the edge she needed to keep the creature on the defensive. But it wasn't enough. The creature adapted again, its body growing harder and more resistant to Kaelynn's weapon. It let out a bone-rattling roar, sending a shockwave that knocked the group off their feet. Taron hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of him. He struggled to push himself up, his vision swimming. In the chaos, he saw Kaelynn falter, the creature gaining the upper hand. "No!" he shouted, his voice raw. Without thinking, he grabbed the pipe he had dropped and charged forward. His mind screamed at him to stop, but his body didn't listen. He swung the pipe with all his strength, aiming for the creature's glowing eyes. The impact wasn't enough to hurt it, but it was enough to distract it. The creature turned its focus to Taron, its massive form towering over him. He froze, his grip on the pipe tightening as he prepared for the worst. Kaelynn's voice cut through the air. Down. Taron dropped to the ground just as a surge of energy shot over his head. Kaelynn's weapon released a blinding burst of light, striking the creature square in the chest. The blast sent it reeling, its form flickering and destabilizing. The creature let out one final, agonized shriek before collapsing into a pool of dark, shimmering liquid. The grove fell silent, the tension dissipating like a broken spell. Kaelynn approached Taron, her expression unreadable. That was reckless, she said, though her tone was softer than he expected. Taron let out a shaky laugh, his heart still racing. Yeah, well, it worked, didn't it? She stared at him for a moment, then extended a hand to help him up. You are fortunate, she said, her lips curving into the faintest hint of a smile. But I will not always be there to save you. Taron took her hand, feeling a strange warmth despite the cold night air. Guess I'll just have to stick close then. The aftermath of the battle left the park in a strange, heavy silence. The shimmering pool where the creature had collapsed slowly evaporated, leaving no trace of its existence except for the shaken group standing at the grove's edge. Taron leaned against a tree, his breathing ragged. Jace and Milo sat nearby, their faces pale and drawn, still processing what had just happened. Kaelynn stood a few paces away, her weapon powered down but still in her hand, her eyes scanning the area for any lingering threats. Is it dead? Milo finally broke the silence, his voice a shaky whisper. Kaelynn nodded but didn't take her eyes off the grove. It has been neutralized. The core of its biomass was destabilized in the final strike. Good, Jace said, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Because I don't think I can handle a round two. Taron tried to chuckle, but it came out as a cough. He glanced at Kaelynn, her composed demeanor still unbroken. You knew exactly how to take it down, he said, admiration evident in his tone. Have you dealt with something like this before? Kaelynn hesitated, her gaze finally shifting to him. Creatures like this are a byproduct of certain technological advancements in my world. They are rare but not unheard of. Neutralizing them is a responsibility I was trained for. Her words carried an undercurrent of guilt that Taron couldn't ignore. So, it's connected to your people, Kaelynn's expression tightened. In a manner of speaking, it is an unfortunate consequence of our attempts to harness energy beyond what we could control. This creature should not have been here. Its presence is an anomaly that should never have occurred. Taron straightened, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. Then how did it get here? Was it an accident? Kaelynn didn't answer immediately. She looked up at the sky, her brow furrowed. That, I do not yet know, but I intend to find out. The weight of her words settled over the group like a blanket, the reality of their situation sinking in. This wasn't just a random, one-off encounter, it was part of something bigger. So, what happens now? Jace asked, breaking the silence. Do we just go back to normal after this? Kaelynn turned to face them, her expression softening slightly. I will remain here for the time being. There is much I need to investigate to ensure that no further anomalies occur. Your world must be protected. Taron felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension at her words. Relief that she wasn't leaving, and apprehension about what her presence might mean for their small, quiet town. Well, you're gonna need a place to stay, Milo said, his attempt at humor falling flat in the tense atmosphere. Kaelynn tilted her head as if considering the idea. That is correct. My vessel is no longer viable as a shelter. Taron spoke up before he could stop himself. You can stay at my place. Jace and Milo both turned to him, their eyebrows raised in surprise. Seriously? Jace asked. You're just gonna invite an alien warrior to crash on your couch, Taron shrugged, trying to play it cool despite the warmth creeping into his cheeks. "She saved our lives. It's the least I can do." Kaelynn studied him, her piercing gaze making him feel like she could see right through him. "You would willingly allow me into your home, despite the danger my presence may bring." Taron met her gaze, refusing to back down. "Yeah, I mean, you're here to protect us, right? And I figure it's better to have you close in case something else shows up." Kaelynn's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "Very well, I accept your offer." Milo groaned, running a hand through his hair. "This is insane. We're living in a sci-fi movie now." "You mean a horror movie," Jace muttered, still clutching his golf club like it was his lifeline. Kaelynn stepped closer to Taron, her presence both intimidating and oddly comforting. "You have my gratitude, Taron. I will not impose for longer than necessary." "Don't worry about it," Taron said, managing a weak smile. "Just, maybe don't vaporize anything inside the house." She raised an eyebrow, clearly unamused by his attempt at humor. "I will exercise restraint." As the group began the walk back to Taron's house, the tension started to ease, replaced by a strange sense of camaraderie. Jace and Milo finally seemed to relax, their banter returning in small bursts as they tried to make sense of the night's events. Taron, however, couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Kaelynn's presence was a reminder that their world wasn't as isolated as they had once believed. There were forces at play far beyond their understanding, and whether they liked it or not, they were now a part of it. When they finally reached his house, Taron held the door open for Kaelynn. She hesitated for a moment, her gaze sweeping over the modest, lived-in space. "Your dwelling is quaint," she said, her tone neutral. "Yeah, it's not exactly alien tech level, but it's home," Taron replied, trying not to feel self-conscious. Kaelynn stepped inside, her presence immediately filling the room. Taron's parents weren't home. They were out of town for the weekend, so he didn't have to explain why an 8-foot-tall alien warrior was standing in their living room. Milo and Jace lingered in the doorway, clearly unsure of how to say goodbye. "So, what now?" Milo asked, scratching the back of his neck. "Now," Taron said, glancing at Kaelynn, "I guess we figure out what's next." Kaelynn nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Indeed, there is much to discuss." Jace snorted. "Yeah, you guys have fun with that. I'm gonna go home and pretend this never happened." "Same," Milo added, already backing out of the door. "Good luck, man. You're gonna need it." As they left, Taron turned to Kaelynn, suddenly feeling the weight of what he had just committed to. "So, you hungry?" Kaelynn tilted her head, clearly confused by the question. "Hungry," Taron chuckled nervously. "Never mind. Let's just figure this out as we go." Kaelynn's lips twitched in what might have been the start of a smile. "Agreed." The first night with Kaelynn in the house was anything but ordinary. Taron wasn't sure what to expect, but he definitely hadn't prepared for watching an alien warrior study his refrigerator like it was an ancient artifact. Kaelynn crouched slightly to fit under the kitchen ceiling, her glowing eyes scanning the contents of the fridge with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. This device, it preserves sustenance by reducing molecular activity. Yeah," Taron replied, leaning awkwardly against the counter. "It keeps food cold so it doesn't go bad." Kaelynn reached out, picking up a carton of orange juice as if it might explode in her hands. "Primitive yet effective," she mused, turning the carton over to examine it from every angle. "You can try it," Taron offered, grabbing a glass and placing it on the counter. "It's just juice." "You drink it." She hesitated for a moment before carefully pouring the liquid into the glass. Her precision was almost comical, as if she thought the carton might malfunction. When she finally took a sip, her expression shifted subtly. Her rigid posture relaxed just a fraction, and her eyes softened. "This is agreeable," she said, setting the glass down. "High praise," Taron teased, though he couldn't help but smile. Kaelynn glanced at him, her brow furrowing slightly. "Your humor is an odd defense mechanism. Do all humans rely on levity in moments of discomfort?" Taron opened his mouth to respond but paused. I mean, probably. It's how we deal with weird situations. Like, having an alien house guest. Kaelynn tilted her head, considering his words. Fascinating. I have studied many species, but few use humor as a means of resilience. It is unique. Glad we're keeping you entertained, Taron said with a grin, though his heart was racing. Talking to her felt like balancing on a tightrope. He never knew whether she'd laugh or analyze him like a science project. Kaelynn took another sip of juice before straightening to her full, towering height. I must begin compiling data on the anomaly we encountered. The creature's presence here cannot be dismissed as mere chance. Right. Work stuff, Taron said, rubbing the back of his neck. Do you need, like, a lab or something? All I've got is my laptop and a really slow Wi-Fi connection. Kaelynn gave him a curious look. I have my own methods of data collection. She raised her arm, and a small device embedded in her armor projected a holographic interface into the air. Complex symbols and graphs danced across the light, completely incomprehensible to Taron. Okay, that's way cooler than my laptop, he admitted, leaning closer to get a better look. Kaelynn glanced at him, her expression softening slightly. Your willingness to assist is noted, Taron. Despite your limited resources, your enthusiasm is commendable. Thanks, I think, Taron said, unsure whether to take that as a compliment. As Kaelynn began working, Taron took a step back, giving her space while trying to process everything. This was his life now, sharing a house with a towering alien warrior who could casually summon holographic tech. And yet, as surreal as it all was, he didn't feel scared or overwhelmed. If anything, he felt excited. Do you always work alone? He asked after a while, unable to stop himself. Kaelynn didn't look up from the hologram. It is customary among my kind. Our responsibilities are often solitary endeavors. Collaboration is rare and reserved for matters of great urgency. That sounds lonely, Taron said, the words slipping out before he could think better of them. Kaelynn paused, her fingers hovering over the holographic interface. It is a necessity. Personal connections can become liabilities in our line of duty. Taron frowned. That sounds like something someone told you, not something you believe. Her gaze snapped to him, sharp and piercing. For a moment he thought he'd crossed a line, but then her expression softened. You are perceptive, Taron. It is unusual. I'll take that as a compliment, he said with a small smile. Kaelynn returned her attention to the hologram, but her posture seemed less rigid. Your perspective is intriguing. Perhaps there is merit in reevaluating certain protocols. Taron didn't know what to say to that, so he stayed quiet, watching her work. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It felt oddly companionable, like they were slowly figuring out how to coexist. Eventually, Kaelynn closed the holographic interface and turned to face him. The data I have collected is incomplete. I will need to venture into the surrounding area to gather additional information. You mean like go back out there? Taron asked, suddenly feeling a twinge of anxiety. Kaelynn nodded. The anomaly may have left residual traces. It is imperative that I identify any remaining threats. Okay, then I'm coming with you, Taron said before he could talk himself out of it. Kaelynn raised an eyebrow. You lack the necessary skills and equipment to assist in such matters. It would be unwise for you to accompany me. Maybe, but I'm not just gonna sit around while you're out there risking your life, Taron said, crossing his arms. Besides, you might need someone who knows the area. I've lived here my whole life. Kaelynn studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she sighed, a soft, almost imperceptible sound. Very well, but you will follow my instructions without question. Deal, Taron said, trying to ignore the nervous flutter in his stomach. Kaelynn gave a small nod, her gaze steady. Then we leave at first light. Taron's heart raced as he realized what he'd just committed to. But as he looked at Kaelynn, standing tall and unshakable, he felt a strange sense of determination. Whatever came next, He wasn't going to back down. The sun had barely begun to rise when Kaelynn and Taron set out, the early morning light casting long shadows across the quiet streets. Kaelynn moved with purpose, her strides long and deliberate while Taron struggled to keep up, occasionally stumbling over uneven pavement. "Do you always walk this fast?" he asked, slightly out of breath. Kaelynn glanced over her shoulder, her expression neutral. "Your pace is inefficient. Time is of the essence." "Right, because alien anomalies don't wait for coffee," Taron muttered under his breath, though he quickened his steps to match hers. Kaelynn stopped abruptly, her eyes scanning the area. They were standing at the edge of a wooded park that stretched into the horizon, a dense cluster of trees blocking their view of what lay ahead. She held up her arm, activating her holographic scanner again. Symbols and lines danced in the air as she analyzed their surroundings. "This area shows residual energy traces consistent with the anomaly," she said, her voice low and focused. Taron shoved his hands in his jacket pockets, looking around nervously. "Residual energy. Is that like a good thing or a bad thing?" "It indicates the anomaly was here recently," Kaelynn replied, taking a step forward into the trees. "Remain alert." "Alert. Got it," Taron said, though his version of alert mostly involved trying not to trip over roots or bump into tree branches. Kaelynn moved with the grace of a predator, her glowing eyes darting from side to side as she scanned their path. Despite her imposing presence, Taron couldn't help but notice the way the soft morning light caught the metallic accents of her armor, giving her an almost ethereal quality. "So, what's the plan if we find this thing?" Taron asked after a while, breaking the silence. Kaelynn didn't look back. "Containment. If the anomaly poses a threat, it must be neutralized." "Neutralized? Like permanently?" "If necessary," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Taron swallowed hard, suddenly feeling very out of his depth. "And what happens if it neutralizes us first?" Kaelynn stopped and turned to face him, her expression calm but firm. "Fear is a natural response, Taron, but it must not dictate your actions. Focus on the task at hand." "Easy for you to say," Taron muttered. "You're built like a tank. I'm just a guy with a flashlight." A faint smile tugged at the corner of Kaelynn's lips, an expression so subtle Taron almost missed it. "Your humor persists, even in the face of danger. Perhaps it is not a weakness after all." Taron blinked. "Did you just compliment me?" Kaelynn didn't answer. Instead, she turned and continued deeper into the forest, leaving Taron to follow with a mix of confusion and reluctant admiration. They walked in silence for another few minutes before Kaelynn suddenly raised a hand, signaling for him to stop. Taron froze, his heart pounding as he tried to figure out what had caught her attention. "What is it?" he whispered. Kaelynn didn't respond right away. Her eyes narrowed and she tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something only she could hear. "We are not alone," she said finally, her voice barely audible. Taron's blood ran cold. "Not alone as in wildlife, or not alone as in alien anomaly." Kaelynn didn't answer. Instead, she motioned for him to stay back and stepped forward, her movements cautious and deliberate. Taron's mind raced as he watched her. He wanted to say something, anything, but the tension in the air was so thick he could barely breathe. Then he saw it, a faint shimmer in the air like heat rising off pavement. Kaelynn stopped in her tracks, her body tensing. "It's here," she said, her voice low and steady. "What do we do?" Taron asked, his voice trembling despite his efforts to stay calm. "Stay behind me," Kaelynn said firmly. "Do not engage unless I give the command." Before Taron could respond, the shimmer in the air began to coalesce, taking on a more defined shape. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, a shifting, amorphous mass of light and shadow, pulsating with an otherworldly energy. Kaelynn raised her arm, her holographic interface projecting a series of symbols into the air. "Identify yourself," she commanded, her voice ringing with authority. The creature didn't respond. Instead, it let out a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through Taron's entire body. He clutched his chest, struggling to steady his breathing as the sound grew louder. Kaelynn took a step forward, her stance unwavering. "I will not ask again," she said, her tone colder now. The creature pulsed again, its form shifting and expanding. Then, without warning, it surged toward them, a wave of energy rippling through the air. "Get down," Kaelynn shouted, grabbing Taron and pulling him to the ground just as the energy passed over them. Taron's heart was racing as he scrambled to his feet, adrenaline coursing through his veins. "What the hell was that?" "It is testing us," Kaelynn said, her eyes fixed on the creature, "determining whether we are a threat." "Well, let's make sure it decides we're not," Taron said, his voice cracking slightly. Kaelynn didn't respond. Instead, she raised her arm again, her interface glowing brighter as she prepared for what was clearly about to become a fight. Taron took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He didn't know what he could possibly do to help, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to leave Kaelynn to face this alone. The creature's pulse quickened, its form swelling with waves of vibrant, erratic light. It hovered menacingly, almost as though it were sizing Kaelynn and Taron up, before releasing another low hum that reverberated deep in Taron's chest. His instinct screamed at him to run, but his feet remained glued to the ground as Kaelynn stood between him and the anomaly, a solid wall of unshakable resolve. "I will attempt to communicate," Kaelynn said sharply, her voice carrying a commanding tone that left no room for argument. "Communicate?" Taron asked, his voice an octave higher than usual. "It just tried to flatten us like pancakes." "I don't think it's in a talking mood." "Silence," Kaelynn said, her glowing eyes fixed on the anomaly. She extended her arm, her holographic interface emitting a series of complex tones and patterns, a language Taron couldn't begin to understand. The creature reacted, its form flickering with rapid pulses of color. For a moment, it seemed to hesitate, shrinking slightly as though processing Kaelynn's attempt to connect. Taron held his breath, praying that whatever she was doing would work. Then, without warning, the anomaly lashed out. A tendril of energy shot toward Kaelynn with lightning speed. She moved faster, sidestepping the attack and raising a shimmering energy barrier just in time to deflect the blow. The impact sent ripples through the air, the ground trembling beneath their feet. "That's not communicating," Taron yelled, stumbling backward as the creature reared up again, its energy spikes crackling like thunder. "It has deemed us hostile," Kaelynn said through gritted teeth. "Its actions are now defensive." "Defensive? It looks like it's trying to kill us," Taron snapped, dodging another burst of energy that singed the ground where he'd been standing. Kaelynn didn't respond. She was fully focused on the creature, her movements precise and deliberate as she weaved through its attacks. Her interface glowed brighter with each second, emitting an increasingly intricate pattern of signals. "What are you doing?" Taron shouted over the chaos. "Recalibrating," Kaelynn replied, her voice steady despite the situation. "Its energy signature is unstable. If I can neutralize its core frequency—" "Neutralize? As in kill it?" Taron interrupted. Kaelynn hesitated just for a fraction of a second. Containment is no longer an option. Taron felt his stomach drop. Despite the danger, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the anomaly than met the eye. It didn't feel entirely malicious, more like it was scared, cornered, and lashing out in desperation. "Wait," he shouted, stepping forward before he could stop himself. "Don't destroy it." Kaelynn turned to him, her glowing eyes narrowing. "You do not understand the threat this creature poses. If it is not neutralized, it could destabilize this entire region." "Maybe," Taron said, his voice shaking but determined. "Or maybe it's just scared. You said it was testing us, right? What if we're failing the test?" Kaelynn didn't respond immediately. Her gaze flickered between Taron and the anomaly, her expression unreadable. The creature pulsed again, its form trembling with energy that seemed on the verge of exploding. "You're risking everything," Kaelynn said finally, her tone cold. "Yeah, well, I'm good at that," Taron replied, his heart pounding as he took another step forward. He raised his hands, palms open, and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "Hey, it's okay. We're not here to hurt you." The anomaly's energy wavered, the flickering light around it dimming slightly. Kaelynn's grip on her interface tightened, but she didn't move, her eyes locked on the creature as though analyzing every detail. Taron took another cautious step forward. "Look, I don't know what you are or where you came from, but if you can understand me, we don't have to fight. Just stop and we'll figure this out together." For a moment, everything was still. The anomaly seemed to shrink slightly, its energy stabilizing into a softer, more even glow. "It's responding," Kaelynn said quietly, a note of surprise in her voice. Taron let out a shaky breath, relief flooding through him. "See, that wasn't so hard." But the moment of calm didn't last. A sudden burst of energy erupted from the creature, not directed at them but into the sky, sending shockwaves through the forest. Taron stumbled, barely managing to keep his footing as the ground quaked beneath him. "What's it doing now?" he shouted. "It's creating a spatial rift," Kaelynn said, her tone urgent. "If it completes the process, the consequences could be catastrophic." Taron's relief evaporated, replaced by a sinking sense of dread. "Okay, so what do we do?" Kaelynn's gaze hardened. "We stop it. Together." Before Taron could protest, Kaelynn grabbed his wrist, pulling him toward the creature. Her holographic interface flared to life, projecting a complex array of symbols and patterns that seemed to match the anomaly's energy. "You wanted to help," she said, her voice firm. "Now's your chance." Taron swallowed hard, nodding despite the fear gnawing at him. "Right, let's do this." As the two of them worked in tandem, the rift above them began to waver. Kaelynn's precise calculations and Taron's raw determination created an unlikely synergy, their combined efforts forcing the anomaly's energy into a more controlled state. For the first time, Kaelynn glanced at Taron with something that resembled genuine admiration. "You are more capable than I anticipated." Taron managed a weak grin. "Yeah, well, don't get used to it." Kaelynn almost smiled in return before refocusing on the task at hand. Together they pushed forward, their actions driven by a shared determination to stop the anomaly, and perhaps to prove something to each other in the process. The rift continued to waver above them, its shifting colors now dancing erratically. Taron's heart raced as they pushed forward, Kaelynn's calculated movements guiding him through the chaotic energy around them. He could feel the hum of the anomaly, vibrating through the air, and despite the growing sense of urgency, he found himself oddly focused on the way Kaelynn moved. Her form was an unyielding silhouette against the pulsing glow, every motion precise and deliberate, the glow from her interface casting strange shadows across her face. Taron swallowed, fighting the impulse to let his mind wander to more personal thoughts. Now was not the time for distractions. "Focus, Taron," Kaelynn's voice snapped him back to the task at hand. Her tone was calm but firm. "We need to stabilize the rift. I'll create a counter-frequency. You have to hold it steady." Taron nodded quickly, his grip tightening around the control device Kaelynn had handed him moments earlier. It looked like an ordinary piece of tech, but he knew it was anything but. The glowing symbols on its surface flickered and shifted with every pulse from the anomaly. "I can't hold it long if it keeps shifting like that," Taron warned. "We don't have a choice," Kaelynn said. She glanced at him over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. "If we fail, the rift will tear open completely. I can't do this alone." Taron felt a rush of determination. He wasn't about to back down now, especially not with Kaelynn relying on him. He had no idea what he was doing, but somehow it felt right. His hands steadied as he adjusted the device, focusing on the rhythm of the anomaly's pulse. "On three," Kaelynn instructed. "1, 2, 3. They activated their devices in tandem, sending out waves of energy that clashed with the anomaly's frequency. The world seemed to hold its breath as a sudden, high-pitched hum filled the air, vibrating through the very ground beneath their feet. For a moment, everything went still. And then, without warning, the anomaly surged forward with incredible force. Kaelynn was knocked off her feet and Taron was sent flying backward, crashing into a tree with a grunt. His vision blurred and for a moment he thought he might lose consciousness. But then a firm hand grabbed his arm, pulling him back to his feet. "Stay with me, Taron." Kaelynn's voice was steady despite the chaos around them. "We're almost there." Taron blinked, trying to clear his foggy mind. He could barely process the information, but somehow he understood. Kaelynn needed him. They both reached for their devices again, fingers trembling as they activated them once more. The energy from the anomaly seemed to push against them, an invisible force trying to break free. The ground beneath their feet trembled and Taron could hear the crackling of energy in the air, like the sound of a storm about to erupt. "This is it," Kaelynn said through gritted teeth. "Push through." Taron pushed back with everything he had, his breath coming in short gasps as he focused on the device. He could feel the resistance, the weight of the energy pressing against him, and yet somehow he held his ground. A loud crack split the air, and the anomaly shuddered, its form pulsing erratically as if in pain. Kaelynn's eyes flashed. "It's weakening," she said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and determination. Taron didn't wait for her to say anything more. He leaned into the device, pushing harder, his whole body straining against the energy. With one final surge, the anomaly exploded in a brilliant flash of light, blinding them both for a brief moment. The sound was deafening, a crackling roar that sent a jolt of fear through Taron's chest. But then, just as suddenly as it had erupted, the light faded. The rift dissolved. The creature was gone. Taron stood there, gasping for breath, his mind spinning. He had no idea what had just happened, but they had done it. They had stopped the anomaly. Kaelynn collapsed to her knees, breathing heavily but with a faint smile on her face. Her armor was scorched and her hair was slightly singed, but her gaze was unwavering as she looked up at Taron. "You did well," she said, her voice low but sincere. Taron wiped sweat from his brow, his heart still pounding in his chest. I don't even know what I did," he admitted, still feeling the rush of adrenaline coursing through him. Kaelynn stood slowly, her expression softening ever so slightly. "You held your ground, that is more than I expected." Taron let out a shaky laugh. "Well, I'm full of surprises." For a moment they just stood there in the aftermath, the quiet settling in around them like a blanket. It felt surreal, as though the world had just shifted and they were the only two people in it. Kaelynn stepped closer, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made Taron's pulse quicken again. "You saved us, Taron," she said, her voice lower now, softer. He swallowed, not sure how to respond. "I guess I got lucky." "No," Kaelynn said, her gaze unwavering. "It was more than luck." Taron hesitated, his mind racing. "Kaelynn, she reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly gentle. "You did what was necessary, and that is all that matters." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning as if something had shifted. Taron wasn't sure what to make of it, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't the same person he had been when they'd first set out on this mission. And neither was she. The stillness of the moment lingered, the weight of their actions hanging between them. Taron couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, not just in the anomaly, but in himself and Kaelynn as well. They had crossed a line, fought together, and shared something that had broken down the walls between them. It was hard to put into words, but he felt it. Kaelynn, her expression unreadable once again, turned away, her posture once again sharp and composed. "We must leave," she said, her voice back to its usual commanding tone. "There may be more to come." Taron blinked, caught off guard by her sudden shift. It was as though she'd put her walls back up, the brief vulnerability vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. He wasn't sure how to feel about it, had what just happened meant nothing to her. But before he could process his thoughts, she was already moving, her footsteps steady as she made her way toward the clearing. "Right," Taron muttered, following after her, his feet crunching on the forest floor. Just like that, huh? He caught up to her quickly, matching her pace. You know, you're a tough one to figure out, Kaelynn. She didn't look at him but slowed down slightly, just enough to acknowledge him. I'm not here to be figured out, Taron. I'm here to complete my mission. His heart sank a little, but he pushed it down. He had no right to feel anything, not when they were still in the middle of a larger war, a mission he was just a small part of. Yet, the sharp pang of disappointment lingered. They walked in silence for a while, the distance between them growing in a way that felt both physical and emotional. Taron couldn't help but wonder if he had been foolish to think there was more between them. They were from entirely different worlds, both in the literal and figurative sense. Eventually, they reached the outskirts of the clearing where their ship still sat, its engine quiet. Kaelynn's steps never faltered, but Taron could tell she was already lost in thought. When they reached the ship's ramp, she paused, turning to face him. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, something fleeting, almost soft. But then it was gone, replaced by that cold determination that had driven her from the start. You'll be safe here, Taron, she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. Taron stared at her, trying to decipher the meaning behind her words. It wasn't an order, but it wasn't quite a comfort either. It was as if she was simply acknowledging their shared experience and moving on as if nothing had changed. You sure you're going to be okay? He asked, his voice quieter now. Kaelynn hesitated, her gaze softening for just a split second before her walls shot up again. I always am, she replied. Taron's chest tightened, but he nodded. Right, I guess you don't need anyone to look out for you. Kaelynn didn't respond, only turning away and stepping up into the ship. As the ramp closed behind her with a heavy hiss, Taron stood still, staring at the now silent craft. He was alone again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't the crushing loneliness that had plagued him before. No, it was something else. There was an unspoken bond between him and Kaelynn now. It was fragile, maybe, but it was there. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. But as the ship powered up and lifted into the sky, Taron couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last time he would see Kaelynn, or the last time their paths would cross. After all, if there was one thing he had learned about her, it was that she never stayed in one place for long. The silence in the cockpit was thick, the only sound being the hum of the ship's engines as Kaelynn navigated through the system. Taron sat in the passenger seat, his hands resting on his lap, his mind still racing from everything that had happened. The anomaly, the fight, the strange bond that had formed between him and Kaelynn. He couldn't seem to escape the thoughts swirling in his head. He glanced at her, her face illuminated by the soft blue glow of the control panels, her expression a perfect mask of calm. It was as if nothing had changed. Yet he could feel the weight of the moment, the things unsaid, the tension hanging in the air. It wasn't until they reached the outer edge of the sector that Kaelynn spoke again. I've arranged for you to stay on a nearby station. It's safe, isolated. You'll be off the grid for a while. Taron's brow furrowed. Off the grid? He didn't like the sound of that. It made him feel like a pawn in a game he didn't understand. She didn't look at him. It's for your safety. The war, she paused as if reconsidering her words. It's escalating. You've been part of something bigger now. Things will get dangerous. Taron shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I'm not a soldier, Kaelynn. I didn't sign up for any of this. You don't have to be a soldier to get caught up in it. Her voice was low, almost too calm, and it sent a chill down his spine. She sounded like someone who had long since accepted the inevitable. The words hung between them, and for a moment, the only noise was the soft beep of the ship's navigational system. Taron wanted to argue, to tell her that he didn't want to be part of whatever this war was, but he knew better than to push her. Kaelynn wasn't one for discussion. He had seen that during their time together, her walls, her focus, her dedication to something bigger than either of them. It was a force he didn't know how to break through, and part of him wondered if he ever could. So this is goodbye, he asked, his voice tight. Kaelynn didn't answer immediately. She flicked a few switches, adjusting the ship's course as they neared the station. The stars outside the viewport were distant and cold, a reminder of the vastness of space and how small he felt in it. "I don't know," she finally said, her voice quieter than before. Taron blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. "What?" Her eyes flicked to him for just a moment before she returned her attention to the controls. "I don't know what this is, Taron." She spoke softly, almost as if she were talking to herself. "You're not part of this world. You're not supposed to be here." Taron's heart skipped a beat. He knew what she was saying. He had known it all along. He was an outsider, someone who didn't belong. But hearing her say it, hearing her voice falter for just a moment, made something twist inside him. "But I am here," he said, his voice firm despite the uncertainty gnawing at him. "And I'm not going anywhere." Kaelynn didn't reply, but he could see her jaw tighten, her posture stiffening as if she were bracing herself for something. As the ship docked at the station, the soft thud reverberated through the hull, and the ramp lowered with a hiss. Taron stood, unsure of what to do next. He wanted to say something more, to find a way to make her understand that he wasn't just going to walk away from everything they had shared. But Kaelynn was already on her way out, her movements brisk and deliberate. "Stay here, Taron," she said without looking back. "I'll be in touch when it's safe." Her words were final. She didn't need to say anything more. Taron stood there for a moment, watching her disappear into the station's dimly lit corridors. He wasn't sure what was happening anymore. But one thing was clear. He wasn't the same person he had been when he first met her, and neither was she. He walked into the station's waiting area where a few others, fugitive refugees and soldiers alike, moved about in the shadows. The station was deserted, as if the war had already consumed everything around them. As Taron settled into a seat in the corner, he couldn't help but think back to their last mission. They had shared something in the heat of battle, something raw and unspoken. He wasn't sure if it was a bond forged by necessity or something deeper. He couldn't explain it, but it was there, and it was undeniable. But as he glanced out the station's viewport at the vast emptiness of space, he realized something. Maybe it wasn't about belonging to this world, this war, or this fight. Maybe it was about being there for each other when it mattered most. And right now, Kaelynn was the one person who had shown him that. The station doors hissed open again, and Taron turned, his heart jumping in his chest, half expecting to see her standing there. But it wasn't Kaelynn who entered. It was a man in a long coat, his face obscured by a hood. Taron tensed, but the man didn't seem to notice him. The man stepped into the shadows, his steps purposeful as if he were searching for something. Taron's instincts kicked in, and he stood, moving quietly toward the entrance. Whatever this was, he needed to find out, and he needed to do it before Kaelynn returned. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far more dangerous. Taron followed the man through the station, his steps light but his heart pounding. The dim lighting and deserted corridors of the station made it feel like a ghost town. He could hear the soft echo of his footsteps, but the man ahead of him was silent, his movements swift and deliberate. He was getting closer, the distance between them closing as they approached a narrow hallway at the end of the station. Taron slowed, trying to be discreet. His instincts told him something was off. The man didn't belong here. He wasn't one of the regular refugees or workers who populated the station. Taron turned the corner just in time to see the man step into a storage room. His hand brushed against the door's control panel, and it slid open with a faint hiss. The man disappeared inside without looking back. Taron hesitated. He wasn't sure what he was hoping to find, but the feeling that something wasn't right pressed against him like a weight. Whatever this man was after, it couldn't be good. He moved quickly toward the door, his fingers grazing the panel. It opened without resistance, the low hum of the station's power systems vibrating through the walls. Inside, the man was crouched in front of a terminal, his back to Taron. There was a low, rhythmic sound coming from the screen, some kind of transmission. The man's hands moved with purpose as he typed in codes, his face obscured by his hood. Taron's pulse quickened. He didn't know who this man was or what he was doing, but it was clear he wasn't supposed to be there. He had to find out what he was up to. Before he could take another step, a voice came from behind him, cold and unmistakable. "You shouldn't be here." Taron froze. He recognized the voice immediately. Kaelynn. He spun around, his heart skipping a beat. She stood in the doorway, her posture as rigid as ever, but her eyes were intense, filled with a mixture of caution and something else, something darker. "What the hell, Kaelynn?" Taron asked, his voice a little too loud. "What is going on here? Who is this guy?" Kaelynn didn't respond immediately. She just stepped into the room, her eyes flicking to the man at the terminal, then back to Taron. "He's a contact," she said, her voice flat. "Someone I've been working with." Taron's brow furrowed. "Working with? On what?" Kaelynn didn't answer, her gaze flicking to the man again. He was still typing at the terminal, seemingly unaware of the tension that had thickened in the room. "I thought you were here to protect me," Taron said, his voice rising in frustration. "I thought I was supposed to be safe, Kaelynn. Why are you hiding things from me?" Kaelynn stepped forward, her tone sharp. "You're safe as long as you stay out of my way, Taron." Her words hit him like a slap. He opened his mouth to protest, but something in her eyes stopped him. There was no softness, no vulnerability, only the cold steel of someone who had long since made their peace with things he could barely comprehend. The man at the terminal finally straightened, his fingers tapping the keys one last time before he turned to face them. He wasn't tall, but his presence was commanding. His eyes gleamed in the dim light, and there was something unsettling about his sharp smile. "You must be Taron," the man said, his voice smooth but laced with something dangerous. Taron took a step back, instinctively putting more distance between himself and this man. "Who are you?" Taron demanded. "What do you want?" The man chuckled, unfazed by Taron's hostility. "I'm just a messenger, nothing more." His gaze flicked toward Kaelynn, his smile fading slightly. "Though I must say it's a pleasure to finally meet the infamous Taron. I've heard much about you." Taron's heart sank. "What do you mean, heard about me?" The man looked back at him, his expression suddenly serious. "You've become involved in matters far larger than yourself. Things you don't yet understand. Your connection to Kaelynn is just the beginning, Taron." Taron exchanged a brief glance with Kaelynn, her face unreadable. What was this man talking about? What did he mean by a connection? "Enough games," Taron said, his voice steady but his fists clenched at his sides. "Tell me what's going on." The man stepped forward, his eyes scanning Taron with an unsettling intensity. "You're caught between two worlds now, my friend. The one you know and the one you've barely begun to see. Kaelynn's mission is more than just about the war. It's about something bigger, something ancient." Taron swallowed, trying to digest the man's words. Kaelynn's mission. What was he getting at? Before Taron could speak, Kaelynn finally moved, cutting off the man with a sharp wave of her hand. "That's enough." The man didn't seem to mind. He simply nodded and turned toward the terminal again, his fingers moving over the keys. Taron looked back at Kaelynn, his mind racing. "What is this? What are you involved in, Kaelynn?" She didn't answer him immediately. Her eyes flickered to the man, who was now pulling up data on the terminal, before she fixed her gaze back on Taron. "You don't want to know," she said quietly. The words hit him harder than he expected. A feeling of betrayal gnawed at him, but it wasn't just about being kept in the dark. It was about the deeper, unspoken truth that he had already known for a while. Kaelynn wasn't the person he had thought she was. And this was no longer just about the war. It was about something darker, more dangerous. Something neither of them could escape. If you enjoyed this thrilling, intergalactic journey filled with unexpected twists, emotional stakes, and a romance that defies the odds, don't forget to like and subscribe.